visiting with Jill and Brent on Cayuse, their beautiful J37.
Good morning, welcome to Cayuse.
Good morning, welcome. Tell us about Cayuse, Brent.
Oh, Cayuse is a fun little boat. She was built in 1988. She is one of 36 J37s that were built in the late 80s and early 90s. Not as often seen in the cruising areas of this part of the world. More likely to see a J37 racing around the buoys, but we find her to be a fun and very workable cruising option for us. Well, the J37 is, I guess, more known for its racing background than its cruising background. And one of the challenges is taking a boat that is sensitive to its overall weight and figuring out how to find that balance between maintaining the fun of sailing a boat that likes to go fast, but also doesn't like to be weighed down too heavily in the water. One of those challenges is anchoring and ground tackle. And so what we found that works really well for us is a primary anchor of a rock nut. Unlike many cruising boats that would go with 100% chain, we find that it works real well on this boat to have about 125 feet of high test chain married to a longer nylon rod. And it gives us great protection and yet also finds a little bit of balance of not overly weighting the bow of the boat. We didn't want to compromise our ground tackle, so just like every other cruiser, we have multiple anchors and multiple rods, but the trade-off comes in what you select to back up your primary system. For us, what works really well are the Fortress anchors that we can break down. They're big, but they're relatively lightweight and give us the protection of having at least 3 independent anchoring options wherever we are.
Our boat is 30 years old, just hauled out, never had an epoxy coat, and not one blister.
Wow.
None. Zero.
Ask
She's
about
amazing.
Good gal.
Yes, she is.
Ask about the deck.
Look at that deck. So tell us about that. Is that new or it looks...
Well, you know, as Jill mentioned, the boat is 30 years old, but amazingly, this is all original gel coat, original molded in non-skid. What we did do before we went cruising is repaint, rebed everything on the deck, repaint with a non-skid grippy surface. But one of the really nice things about well-built boats from the 80s and 90s is they use good glass, they use good resin, and if you take reasonable care of them, they obviously hold up for a long period of time. So yes, we actually, as you look at the boat, most everything you see in terms of the setup of the boat, the basic sailing gear on the boat, is original equipment from 30 years ago. Lots of bits and pieces get replaced.
Sure.
Before we went cruising, the standing rigging, which again, a little bit atypical for a cruising boat. Usually you would see twisted wire as the standing rigging. This has rod rigging. It was designed for rod rigging as a race boat, and if done well, it's just as strong.
Safe, yeah.
It's a little bit different to work with if you have a problem with a piece of standing rigging off cruising, but we felt like as long as we maintain it well and replace it all before we headed out, it should hold up just fine. So far, that's been a good solution.
So are these new sails?
You know, interestingly enough, when you buy an old race boat, and I guess I should put the disclaimer in there, neither Jill or I have spent much time on the race course.
Okay.
People meet us and they see the boat we're on and they assume, oh, these must be racers that are off on vacation.
But they want to get you out there and go for a race.
But the reality is our 35 plus years of messing around on boats has been almost exclusively cruising.
Yeah.
But as we spent more time cruising, we found that what we really, really enjoy is sailing. And boats that are designed to race are fun to sail, whether you're racing or out cruising. And so what we found is the setup for the race boat with some minor modifications to accommodate the fact that 2 people are sailing the boat instead of a race crew of 6 or 7, really makes it pretty simple and pretty manageable to
But we
keep it
switched
moving.
from a carbon fiber main.
When we
which
bought
I
the boat,
loved that sail.
in its previous life, it was a race boat, and it actually did
Had
quite
some
well
beautiful
racing
sails.
on the East Coast for a while in Texas, in Southern California, and then it ended up in Puget Sound where we found it. So we inherited literally a truckload of sails from previous owners who had been very much into the racing aspect of the boat. The reality for us, the sails that became the most useful were the delivery sails that had never been used on the boat. So what we cruise with are very stout main, jib, asymmetrical spinnaker that were all purchased by a previous owner as what he would have the delivery crew use when they sailed the boat back
Makes sense.
from
You're
a.
going to be doing long distance cruising.
And so yeah, we left the carbon fiber main at home and some high-techy looking sails that maybe don't have quite the shelf life of a well-built cruising sail. But within that big truckload of sails, we were able to pull out what really works cruising and keep it simple for us.
So for this season, was there any new equipment on board? Or?
Well, we actually had twisted our vang off of Cape Mendocino, so we had to walk through customs with this.
Wow.
And how'd that go, Brent?
Well, you know, for those, one of the challenges of cruising is you can't run down to your local chandlery and pick up a piece of equipment. And so if you look at a boom vang and imagine a cardboard box that sort of looks like a large bazooka that you're carrying over your shoulder through an international airport, you never make it to the customs gate to explain what you're doing. You are invited to
Open it up.
open it up and spend a lot of time explaining what's that big black thing in that box that you want to take into Mexico. Fortunately, with a little explanation and appropriate paperwork and your temporary permit and all of those other things that we hear about as we go cruising, it's all very manageable and doable. But a project that back home might take a weekend's worth of work ends up being several months of ordering, planning, receiving, and figuring out how the heck are you going to get it on the boat. So the J-boat, as you look around, it's a pretty classic interior design. And it's interesting to note that when we encounter other J-boats of the 80s, 90s, and even into the 2000s, the basic layout pretty much stays the same. Obviously, if you move from the 37 to the 40 to the 42 and on up, you have more interior volume to work with. But they tend to do a lot of the same things. And not just J-boats. I think this basic layout works, and it's worked well for a lot of boats for a variety of purposes. On the J-boats, you know, people are a little bit surprised when they compare the exterior of this boat and come down and say, oh, there's a lot of wood in this boat. And I think that is probably one of the characteristics that
really
kind of
beautiful.
dates it for that 80s, 90s. If you start looking at one of our good cruising friends last season in Mexico, cruised on a J120. Another boat more noted as a race boat than a cruising boat. But if you look at the interior layout of the J120, it's not dramatically different. But what started to happen with those newer boats is the wood went away. they found new materials and new technologies to accomplish the same kind of spaces, a little more modern aesthetic, and certainly saved a fair amount of weight. For a 37, I guess it depends on what era you want to compare the boat. The total displacement of this boat is about 14,000 pounds, which for the time when it was built would be considered a pretty lightweight boat. A similar sized competitive boat today would be much lighter than that, of course, and so, you know, that evolution has continued.
So one of the big concerns on boats is space, and this is a smaller boat. How do you repair your engine? Where is it, and how do you have access to it?
Great question. And on the J37, a focus of design with a lighter weight boat is how you place those major components and how you keep the weight low and in the center of the boat. And one of the best features of the J37 is the engine sits right in the middle of the main cabin. So with many boats, you're digging around and crawling and using a light, and you never quite see this side of the engine or that side of the engine. On a J37,
whoa, that's cool. There it is.
Now look.
There it is. Again, a relatively lightweight boat, so it doesn't need a huge power plant. Before we went cruising, we did repower the boat with a Volvo D130F. It's a small 30 horsepower, 3-cylinder diesel. But you can see by keeping that weight in the center of the boat and low, you have 360-degree access to every component of the drivetrain. You can access the bilge, you can access the shaft, your stuffing box, your transmission. It really eliminates all the good excuses you can come up with for why I'm not going to do that maintenance job. Literally, we're able to, every time we use the engine, you can do a full inspection of the system and not be concerned about what's lurking in that one corner that you have to take the boat apart.
Perfectly.
So this is, for me and my experience on boats, this was a huge feature in making this work for us.
That's great.
So it's interesting that you know, this feature of the engine and where it is and how convenient it is for working on the boat. J-boats are an interesting company in that some people don't realize that J-boats don't build boats. J-boats design and then have other people build, and then they market their boats. Back in the early days and up through the design and build of the J37 and many of the boats we connect to J-boats, the 40, the 42, the 46, great sailing boats, were all built up, for the most part, on the East Coast. Many of them by Tillotson and Pearson, a renowned East Coast builder. But the J-boat concept and what they have been recognized in the industry and in business in general is they have great designs and they really target their designs to a particular purpose. And over the years would tend to have a fairly limited run in the number of boats they would build to a design, and then they'd refine the design and move forward. It was always a building on the design before kind of concept, so you'll see many features that are really the same, whether you're looking at a J35, a 37, a 40, 42, but they all have their unique twist. With the 37, as I mentioned earlier, there are only about 36 of them built, I think. It actually evolved during that build run. So the feature we love, which was an original design of the 37, the engine sitting in the middle of the saloon, actually evolved out of the design. If you see some of the later J37s, they added a C to the end of the designation, a J37C for cruising.
Oh.
The advantage of that evolution is they made the interior space a little bit bigger. They added a U-shaped galley that made that more useful and workable for galley work and living aboard. But the trade-off is they moved the engine under the companion way. For us, the trade-offs really tip in the direction of the original design, which certainly makes it easy to change the oil
So
and
important.
take care of your engine. Absolutely.
I'm sailing, a touch of liberty. I'm sailing, a glimpse of eternity. All my dreams came true. Now my dreams are you. Feel the breeze to touch the sky. I'm sailing, breathe the liberty. I'm sailing.